And welcome back to another episode of The Credit Authority. Once again, I am your host, Rhonda Kulch, and I am so glad that you joined us today. We always want to thank our sponsors, so thank you so much to Equity First. If you are experiencing credit and or financial challenges, feel free to reach out to any one of their trained consultants. They are there to give you a free action plan. You can reach them at area code 631-714-4822. And with that said, we are going to jump right into our next guest. We have the one and the only amazing Jurianne Franqui. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, Rhonda.
You know, we always talk offline. And for those that don't know Jurianne Franqui, you are an attorney and you specialize in estates, trusts, wills, probate, and all that other good jazz.
All that jazz, yes. Look at that.
As we're talking about microphone chatter today. So tell us a little bit about your practice.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I do wills, I do healthcare proxies, power of attorneys, trust, probate, and administration if they pass away without a will. So when it comes to the basic estate plan, so the last will and testament, the healthcare proxy with the living will, and a power of attorney document, that's why I call it the basic estate plan. It is so crucial to have. And it amazes me when I hear of even famous people with large estates, $1 million estates, and they pass away without a will. And what sort of predicament does that put their family, loved ones, and put them in? So what is accomplished with the last will and testament? You get to name your executor, and that's the person who you trust will take care of things. You trust will be fair. You trust will not misappropriate anything, and they will distribute all of your assets as according to your will. You get to list out your beneficiaries, and you also get to name a guardian for your minor children. And so all of those things are very important, because if you don't list out how people are to inherit, that means that upon your death, even your children could start to argue who deserves more, because, say someone has 4 children and they say, oh, well, they're just going to do everything fair. They're going to do 25, 25, 25, 25%. Not necessarily. Oftentimes parents are the glue that keeps children, I don't want to say in line, but basically in line, cooperating with one another, and being that glue. When you take the parents out the situation, oftentimes siblings don't have that same incentive to get along with each other, because that's what was holding them together. Add into that the grief and the trauma of losing a parent, and it's a recipe for a disaster. So when there's a last will and testament in place, it takes that burden off, because it's simply put there in a document.
Which I love. And, you're hitting on a variety of different things that I want to pick your brain about. So let's start with families.
Yes.
Is there a certain time or a certain age where you think somebody should be prepared, right? When you're speaking to young couples or new couples, they're not necessarily thinking about their demise.
Right.
They're not thinking about that. So what strategy do you implement to try to target, maybe age appropriate couples and families to get started?
So what I see with young couples, what usually motivates them, it's not so much the assets of like what happens to their earthly belongings. It's the thought of what happens to my children, who watches them. I will have a conversation of, okay, so you have a child or you have children and you've named a godparent. That godparent is not the legal guardian. And I break it down for them, because oftentimes people have this assumption that if they were to pass away, their children automatically will go to their godparent, or they'll automatically go to their own parent. And it's like, that's not true. It will end up that people are in court arguing over guardianship, and now it's costing them a lot of money. And in the meantime, your children not only have lost a parent, but they're in limbo and they don't have a home to call their own anymore. And that just traumatizes the child even more. So with young couples, what motivates them, young couples with children, what typically motivates them is what happens to your children if you pass away.
Now, in reference to young couples, right, I deal with a lot of variety of clients. And what I'm hearing a lot lately is prenup. Now, does that come into effect at all when there's somebody that might have a prenup, but now you're positioning their will? What does that look like? Do you, does one document, I don't want to say validate or supersede another document.
So when it comes to a prenup, and that's more the family law area, but there is this overlap because you want to make sure that they're in line with each other, because sometimes in a prenup, yes, it says like in the event of divorce, but sometimes that prenup also will touch on in the event of death. I want my spouse to only get this amount or not to get anything at all, or et cetera. And then if they come to me and they don't even tell me about the prenup, we've got a problem. Because then if they unfortunately pass away and this prenup is presented that has language that addresses their death, and then they say created a will that is completely contradictory to the prenup, well, there you go. There's some litigation right there, which again costs more money and it leaves people in limbo. And chances are they needed that income to continue to support themselves.
What do you think holds people back from taking the steps for seeing somebody like yourself?
What you said earlier, they don't want to think about their demise. I have found that people get very emotional when they've come to me and they're talking about, and they're thinking of the reality of, I am planning for a life that doesn't include me in it. So I'm planning a life that I'm not there for my children or my grandchildren anymore. And they don't really want to think or talk about it. But what I tell them is, but you're making sure that they are secure, because we can't cheat death. It eventually will come to all of us. But what makes you feel secure is the fact that your children are secure, your grandchildren are secure, your spouse is secure. And that sense of security that you can go to sleep at night knowing everything is in place, and I've thought about the contingencies, I've thought about the planning, and I have documents in place so that if something happens, they will be okay.
When we have these natural disasters and we have other, what we'll say, global life events, do you find that there's an uptick in your business?
Oh, yes. COVID, the reality of it doesn't target anyone in, at first they had different claims, but ultimately we realized anybody could be affected by COVID. It doesn't present the same in everyone. And then it's that reality of your mortality. We have seen this past week, Hurricane Ian, now that's in Florida, but it does make people realize that in any moment, you're here one moment, you may not be here the next. And it could even be something as I had one couple come to me because they saw a fatal accident on the highway and they realized, wow, what if that was us? What happens to our children? What happens to our house? How are things, going to continue in one of our absences? And so literally the next week they called me up and they also got life insurance after seeing that accident.
Listen, sometimes it takes a tragedy,
right,
to bring out the best in somebody. Now, in reference to overall, obviously you are a trained professional. And one of the things that we spoke about offline was this uprising of social media and people getting information from social media. How does that impact your business in setting expectations for clients?
I'll be transparent. It makes it more difficult because then the client is coming in, the potential client is coming in and they're saying, well, I heard that. And isn't it true that fill in the blank? And oftentimes they're hearing things on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, and it's information from people who are not attorneys. They may have some information for themselves. It may even be true for that individual. But as I always say in law, it depends. That's like my favorite phrase because it does depend. It's always fact specific. And until I speak with a client and know their specific family structure, their family dynamic, the goals that they have and the concerns that they have, I can't advise them. So how could someone on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram who doesn't even know them give them advice? So that's why I always say in any sphere, go to the professional in that arena, because then you sit down, you have a conversation with them, you tell them what's going on, you tell them your family dynamic, what you're trying to accomplish through these documents, what you're worried about, and then that professional can give the advice that is specific to that individual's needs and wants.
Now, just for the sake of time, my last question for you, if somebody is preparing to see you, what documents should they be preparing to give you?
Great question. So when I have clients come in, I have an intake form and we go over things. But some of the things that I want them to have is the deed to their home, so that I know how things are titled, their bank accounts, not to know the information, but to know how that is structured. Is it individual? Is it joint? Are there named beneficiaries? Their life insurance, again, for the purpose of, do they have named beneficiaries? Goodness, there was one more that I was just thinking of. But any document, any account that would have another individual listed so that we're clear how everything in their estate is structured.
Perfect. Now, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, how do they find you?
They can find me. I can be reached by my office telephone, which is 631-446-8356. That's 631-446-8356.
And you are located in Hauppauge, but are you limited to just Long Island, or can you help clients just all over New York?
I can help clients all over New York. I'm also available via Zoom, and I set up appointments everywhere.
Perfect. So you heard it, people. If you do not have your estates, trusts, wills, and all the other good jazz in place, consider reaching out to our guest, Jurianne Franqui. And until next time, stay tuned for our next guest.
Thank you, Rhonda. It's been a pleasure.